Hey guys, I'm Mark. Today it's really cold outside, it's late January, and I thought I'd come in here and make a video about basil. There's a lot of different kinds of basil. Basil isn't just basil. Here at the nursery we sell over 10 different kinds, and they're all kind of different, especially from a grower's point of view or a gardener's point of view in terms of their habit, their growth habit, so on and so forth. To my right here is an example of that. If you've ever grown basil before, you've probably found out that at some point or another it goes to flower and then it goes to seed and you don't have any more leaves that you can harvest. It's sort of done for. This is called Greek columnar basil. It's a really nice basil because it never goes to flower, or it hardly ever does. This plant has been in this pot since about late September. Like I said, it's late January right now, and it still hasn't gone to flower. This is also a really interesting basil because it's the only kind that we like to propagate. It's a very easy kind to propagate. What I mean by propagate is you take a cutting off of this plant, you stick it in the soil, it grows roots, and bam, you have a new plant. So I'm going to show you how I do that. It's a very simple process. First, you're going to have some potting soil. I've got some 3-inch pots here that I've already wet down a little bit. When you're sticking cuttings, it's a little different from seed. You want to water your soil down a little bit first, get it damp first. So that's what I've done here. This is just a typical 3-inch nursery pot. If I were going to be doing this to make plants for my own garden, I probably wouldn't put them in 3-inch pots. What I would probably do is use a tray like this. This is just a 50-cell nursery tray. These are very common in the industry. And actually, they're really easy to get too. If you don't have one of these, any local garden center near you that grows their own plants is probably going to have a bunch of these lying around. So just give them a call when they're not real busy and say, you know, hey, could I maybe come by and buy a couple of these off of you, a couple old ones. The chances are they'll sell you some for pretty cheap, but they're wonderful. I grow all kinds of things in here for the garden. But this time of year, if I were to plant basil in here, by the time it was big and ready to go, it would still be really, really cold outside, too cold outside for me to plant it out in the garden. So for today's purposes, I'm just going to plant in 3-inch pots, and then when they get big, I'll just use them as gifts. People can put them in their kitchen windowsill and whatnot. So taking the cutting, let's see, when you're taking a cutting, you always want to start with having a really clean cutting instrument. This is just a razor blade. We really like razor blades because they're disposable. With how many thousands of cuttings we take at a nursery, it's nice to just have a disposable, good sharp object that you can keep clean easily. But any cutting tool will work. So I'm looking for, basil is very simple. It's not very temperamental. You don't have to be too particular about your cutting. You'd like cuttings in general, you want them to be kind of new growth. Let me see if I can get a larger one here. Okay. So that would make a good cutting for us. What we're going to want to do is we're going to think about where the roots are going to come out of this. The roots are going to shoot out right below the nodes, like right at where this leaf joins the stem. And same thing up here. So what I'm going to want to do is cut this right below that node, and then I'm going to cut off any extra leaves. What makes this plant in particular really good for cloning or propagating with cuttings is that you'll notice it has smaller leaves compared to a typical basil. And what'll happen is when I stick this into the soil, any cutting, any soft fleshy cutting, when you stick it into the soil, when you take it away from its mother plant, it's going to wilt a little bit at some point. This is a nice basil to stick cuttings for because it's got these small leaves that sort of point upward. Now, a lot of basils have those, those big floppy leaves that if they're laying down on the soil surface, that can cause some rot issues. So they're going to be a little bit more difficult sometimes. But this one is really good because like I said, the leaves are small and they point upward like that. So we have our cutting. Next thing you're going to want to use, you don't have to use this for basil. Basil usually propagates pretty easily, but it's cheap enough. This is pretty inexpensive stuff. If you're going to buy this, if you don't have any rooting hormone already, definitely get some. You don't need a container this large. I mean, we have a commercial, or not a commercial, but it's a pretty substantially sized nursery operation. So we'll go through something like this relatively quickly. For the average homeowner or serious gardener, you only need like a couple ounces, and it should last you for quite a long time. There's a spoon in here. For dipping, I just cut off the bottom of a little coffee cup, cardboard coffee cup. That works great. Like I say, you just need a little tiny bit. That's what it looks like. They sell this in gel. That's fine too. We find that either or works. This is a 0.1% active ingredient, which works great for most things. If you're taking cuttings of like woody shrubs or trees or something like that, then you can bump up the active ingredient. They sell it up to like 0.8%. A little bit more powerful stuff for the more woodier cuttings. So we got our rooting hormone, and I also have here just a little dish of water. And I'm just going to take my cutting like this. I'm going to dip it in the water, and I'm going to dip it in the rooting hormone, and then just stick it right into the soil. This is just regular potting soil. This is what we use throughout the nursery for all our annuals. I'll show you. I got some dry stuff down here. We call it P15 mix. It's just regular plain potting soil. Some perlite, peat moss, a little bit of bark. There's no fertilizer in this, like slow release fertilizer or anything like that. It is completely inert, I guess you'd call it. We add all of our fertilizer through water soluble, like fertigation water. That way we have a little bit more control. But you can use potting soil that has the fertilizer already in it. That'll work just fine. So that's how we stick a cutting. I'll just do one more. Okay, they don't need to be that big. When you have a little small cutting like this, sometimes it does better because you don't have as much material above the surface that's stressing the plant out as much. Just got this little tiny plant. It'll send out roots, and once it sends out a root, this is basil. This is going to grow really fast anyway. Sometimes the trick is just working it around that little stick or piece of mulch or something like that to get a good anchor in there. Normally, when we stick cuttings, we would stick them in something like this. I was just talking about a 50 tray because it has 50 cells. This is what we call a 105 tray because it's got 105 cells. But like I say, at this point, this time of the year, there's no sense in me filling this up with cuttings because by the time they get big, it's still going to be way too early to put any kind of basil outside, at least in my part of the world. So I'll finish sticking some more of these later. And now I want to move on to talking about some of the seed basils and sort of the differences between some of them. A lot of people, when you think about basil, you think about Italian basil, Italian sweet basil. In this case, Genovese basil is the usual typical pesto basil that a lot of people use. You see it in caprese salad, basil that everybody's familiar with. That's what this is. Just a general Italian basil, the old heirloom that's been around for forever. Now, there are a few different types of basil, or a bunch of different types of basil that have been bred off of that old standard type. And I'm going to go through a few of those with you that we like here at the nursery. Let me get some of this stuff out of my way. First one I'm going to talk about is called Dolce Fresca. That's an AAS winner. This is pretty much just looks just like your regular Genovese basil, except it's a little more compact, it's a little more round, it's a little more tidy. It doesn't get quite as big and floppy in the garden as the old heirloom type. And it would work really well in a pot for that reason. But otherwise, flavor, fragrance, all that stuff is pretty much the same. So that's Dolce Fresca. It's an AAS winner too, which is a pretty big deal. Next one I want to talk about is Everleaf Emerald Towers. Try saying that 50 times fast. Everleaf Emerald Towers. This basil is actually sort of similar to this basil in the way it grows, because this one's claim to fame is it goes to flower much later than a lot of the other typical Genovese type basils. This one, I think last year we were watching it, it didn't flower until about 2 months, maybe at least 2 months after the rest of them. Because you know, once it goes to flower, you're not getting much more basil after that point. It has a little bit slightly smaller leaf than the typical Genovese type basil, but I mean, it's sort of a small trade-off for the benefit that you get by not having it go to flower as quickly. And then two that I want to talk about. Sometimes when you're growing basil, you can have issues with downy mildew, especially like in our area in the Chesapeake region. We have very hot and humid summers, and last year I was doing a lot of overhead watering in my garden, so I did have some issues with downy mildew. These work great. These are two varieties from Rutgers University. One of the plant breeders there, his name is James Simon. He's a real nice guy. I met him. Devotion and Obsession. They're pretty similar to one another when you look at them side by side, but they just wound up being excellent basils. They never got affected at all with the downy mildew. When you meet James, the guy that bred these, or one of the people that bred these, he's a very, very passionate guy about what he does. He just can't stop talking about basil, it seems like, when you meet him. So maybe that's got something to do with why they're called Obsession and Devotion, but I don't know for sure. You'd have to ask him. Moving on, we'll get into some of the other basil types. Here's a cinnamon basil and lemon basil. I usually call these like tea basils because that's what I'd like to do with them. They've got a really, cinnamon basil, it's got a really strong sort of peppery flavor to it. Like I say, it's really good in tea, especially iced tea. Like in summer when you got a whole lot of basil around, then you can make a big pitcher of iced tea with this. It's great. Lemon basil, same sort of thing. This one's really fragrant, smells a lot like a citrus, lemony fragrance. Great for tea. A lot of health benefits associated with those kinds of basils. Another one that's pretty spicy, very pungent, is Thai basil. This one's called Siam Queen. It's another AAS winner. And like I said, very, very pungent flavor. This one's got more of like a licorice flavor. And not only that, I mean, it really looks pretty in the garden. It's a very interesting variety to grow, even just ornamentally. Moving on, lettuce leaf basil. Okay, this is an interesting one. The name is as it implies. The leaves on it just look like great big lettuce leaves. So you can use it for like a little differently than you would use a regular basil. You can make like wraps out of it, like if you want to take pieces of chicken or fish or like shrimp or something and wrap them up, rice, caprese salad, you make little caprese salad wraps. Or even if you just want a basil that's a little more mild. This is more mild than a traditional Italian basil. So again, if you're eating caprese salad, basil's a little too pungent for you, then maybe grow something like this. That's lettuce leaf. Red Rubin. This is a red basil. Red basils are pretty cool. Just if nothing else, how they look in the garden when you plant them intermixed with your green basils, they kind of really provide a really neat contrast. And then not only that, you put them in like a salad or some situation where you have a lot of green stuff, and you've got that red for the contrast also. As far as flavor goes, it's a little bit more pungent than a typical basil, but it still has that basil flavor, maybe a little more spicy, sharp. And then one more, spicy Globe Basil. This one's really interesting. It is another one that sounds as implied. It grows like a little globe, like a little teeny tiny leaves. It's about that size, really. And it's really interesting. It looks like a little boxwood plant. And that can be interesting using using it in culinary terms, because when you have these little tiny leaves, I mean, you can, I don't know, you're doing little appetizers or something like that, it might be a little bit more visually intriguing. So those are some of the types that we grow. When it comes to sowing seed, I'm going to show you a little bit about how we do that. Again, I'm just going to use, I filled up some trays of 3-inch pots. Again, same stuff. This is just regular old potting soil. Nothing special here. These are 3-inch pots, 3-inch deep pots is what we call them. But you can really use anything. These are going to make great gifts for somebody. First step that we do when we sow the seed is the potting soil, when you get it out of a bag, any potting soil when you get it out of a bag, it already has a certain amount of moisture in it. We don't adjust that. We put it right in the pots with the same amount of moisture it comes with pretty much, and we sow our seed right on top of that. But first, we're going to do, we call it dibbing. Just going to go around and just kind of push the soil down a little bit, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the seeds in each one, and then after that I'm going to sprinkle some soil on top, and then I'm going to brush off the excess. So the reason why I'm doing this is because when I brush that excess off, I want the seeds to be down low enough that they don't get brushed off with the rest of the topsoil. Okay, that's pretty good. Some people go a little deeper than others. Basil's not going to fight you too much. That's about what I got there. Okay. And then what I'm going to do, I filled up 3 trays. So I'm going to do 8 pots of each variety that I just talked about. I'm going to sow them, and then I'm going to, maybe in 3 weeks or so, I'm going to do an update on this video. I'll show you each kind and how it's doing and what it looks like at that point. So we'll start with, which one did I start with? The regular Genovese. All basil seed looks identical. What we do is we generally try to shoot for 6 seeds in each pot. Like I say, when I'm doing this on my own, I would plant into a 50 cell for growing basil or herbs for my garden. But these are the pots that we actually grow basil in to sell to our customers here at the nursery. So this is exactly, the finished product here is exactly what they're going to wind up with. That's what that's going to look like. So as a rule of thumb, we put 5-6 seeds in each 3-inch pot. Okay. All right, that's one. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna write my tags up, and I'm gonna fill up the rest of this flat. When I draw my tags, I'm gonna use a pencil. We always like to use pencil on our tags. It lasts forever. Especially on like wooden tags and things like that. If you ever use wooden tags outside in your garden and use like a marker on them, permanent marker, it'll wash right out. Pencil doesn't go anywhere. You can look, if somebody builds a fence even 10 years ago, you'll still see the pencil marks on it in a lot of cases where the carpenter was making his marks. So yeah, I'm just going to fast forward this video. I'll catch up with you in a little bit once I got a few of these done, and I'll show you the next step. Okay, I've got 1 tray filled here. Some are 6, some are more like 11 in each one, but that's okay. They'll be just fine. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some more of my potting soil, and I'm just going to cover right over the top. Again, nothing fancy here, just I forgot my brush. That's okay, I'll just use my hand. Usually I use like a horsehair brush or like the end of a broom, but we're only doing a couple flats here, so palm of the hand will work just fine. So you just kind of shave off the excess. And those seeds, they're low enough that by doing this, I'm not gonna take them anywhere. Okay. That's one flat. Now, what I'm gonna do, I guess I can water it right here. Let me just clear the way a little bit so I don't make a mess. Make sure all my seeds are out of the picture before I do this. All right. Now's the time when they get water. Just give them a light dusting of water just like that. That's all they need at this stage. I'm not putting any kind of fertilizer water on them yet. This is just regular clear water at this stage. You want to wait for them to germinate before you use any kind of fertilizer. Because a lot of times what will happen is when you use fertilized water, it, gosh, I did make a mess. It creates a situation where algae likes to grow more on the surface of the soil, and that can kind of cause problems with the seedlings germinating sometimes. What I'll do with this tray now is I'm going to take it into one of our other greenhouses. I'm going to put it right on the bench that has some heating underneath. Same thing with these guys, going to put them in there too. When you're germinating seedlings, you want them to be in a really warm environment more than anything. You want to shoot for a soil temperature of around at least maybe around 70 degrees. If you have I hear a lot of people use like a heating pad like you'd use for your back. You could wrap that in like a towel or something, put it on really, really low, or wrap it all in a bag so that you don't get it wet. I've heard some people do that, but always keep an eye on the temperature. Temperature is huge at this stage. Well, that's pretty much it. I'm gonna, like I say, do another video in a few weeks once everything starts coming along. I'll show you all the different kinds. I've still got several more of the types that we talked about yet to sow here. I'm going to do that now, and then I'll touch back with you in a few weeks. So I hope you like my video. If you haven't subscribed, please do. You'll be the first ones to hear about all my new videos coming up. And as always, thanks so much for watching, and see you on the next one.